Today's video is being brought to you with help from G Fuel, one of the most popular energy supplements on the market, known for providing fuel for the focus of a new generation of gamers, creators, students, and athletes. Made with top-tier ingredients, their sugar-free formulas give you the energy, focus, and endurance you need to power through your daily tasks. And if you are interested in getting your hands on some, either to try it out for the first time and see if it's right for you, or to resupply your favorite flavor and are looking for a bit of a discount, please use the code TheDsIEGE and get 20% off your next purchase, while at the same time supporting this channel and helping me continue to create the content you've all come to enjoy. I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested, and thank you in advance for any who choose to purchase using my code. I very much appreciate your support. Without further ado, on to the feature presentation.
When I arrived at the door, or rather, the door arrived at me, I howled, hurling myself inside, out, and then and there I was, lost and unlost, howling on the floor in harmony with my wretched Kalymos, lacerated in flesh and heart, scattered as the bell glass, spilling blood and stomach on the cold stone floor. But I sensed the other there, at the wall's breach behind me, reaching still. I screamed, but my voice was gone. Forever. I looked, but my eyes would never see again.
Hey all, Siege here, and today, well, before we get our hands on Warframe's newest update, Whispers in the Walls, I wanted to get a video out talking about some of the inconsistencies I've found with Entrati and what we've seen so far, coupled with some newly released information that may confirm some important aspects of the coming quest. I'm speaking explicitly of the new Codex we'll be getting with the update. A rather primitive looking setup given the sheer volume of technology we see within his laboratory, but perhaps there's a reason we have not yet had the chance to discover regarding its look. It's currently available on the Warframe website, and although I'm actually working on a video encompassing all of the entries as a whole, let's look at a few of these passages and see what aspects of Entrati Warframe itself has deemed important. A few in particular may even explain what's about to happen in the very near future. The first account of significance comes from within the passage labeled The Void. The Tenno has discovered abandoned Orokin towers within the Void. These towers were intended to act as sanctuaries from sentient attack during the Old War, since the Void is intensely damaging to sentients. Supplementary information. Much of Orokin society was dependent upon the Void. It was used as a shortcut through space and as a source of energy. Its full potential was first theorized by Entrati within these very laboratories. It is Entrati whom this device serves. It is Entrati who has instructed us to locate the chosen operator. Significant development. The Tenno has encountered the Entrati family on Deimos. The family remains unaware of the existence of these laboratories. The Necroloid is an exception. Its memory is, however, suppressed until the activation of the Kalymos Sequence. Continuing to monitor. This section is designed to reinforce Entrati's involvement in the discovery and implementation of the Void within the Orokin society, and is a kind of primer for this concept in-game. It begins with a bit of information that at first doesn't seem relevant to the rest of the entry, providing insight into why the Orokin towers we frequent were initially constructed, and why they still exist in the way they do long after the Old War had ended. It does, however, strike me odd that we never really see any of the survivors aboard any of them. And if there are no survivors of the Orokin race within these towers, it begs to ask what exactly happened. Did the neural sentries, the security systems installed within these structures, with the ability to commandeer any creature within its pool and force them into a kind of compulsory conscription, have something to do with this? And further, would the association between the Void and the Sentry's corrupted units, those glowing gold but fitted with one of these control units, imply that this is due to Void exposure? Or were the Orokin who used these areas as sanctuaries themselves corrupted by the Void and thus eradicated by the Sentry? Although somewhat disturbing, this does show how versed the Orkin were in mind control long before that of the Narmer Vales we see in the New War, so it's really hard to know who to trust in-game that won't at some point betray the Tenno, as all factions have a reason to want them dead. This would even include Albert Entrati, an Orkin whose visage is in fact many times associated with these specific devices, given that the Tenno are said to have destroyed the entirety of his Orkin brethren, something briefly mentioned in the Stalker entry, but implying their involvement versus outright confirming it. Is there some connection here where we learn more about these towers and the sentries specifically? I suppose we'll find out soon, but the next aspect of this passage describes the Orkin society as dependent upon the Void as a method of travel as well as energy production, with Albert Entrati being the father of this technology. But not much in the way of the details of Entrati's research, combined with some of the dialogue we get in his second Requiem.
Jahu. Form. My departure was a day less than any other. When I stepped inside the bell, I saw no crowd through its glass. No skeptical onlookers, no regal send-off. They all had given up on me and my paradoxical formulations. The wasted years had all shown the Void to be just that. Nothing. No energy, no entanglement, no form. To spacefaring ambitions, a dead end. On the day, my laboratory was mostly vacant of witnesses, most of all of expectation. Only my sluggish attendants, my sagacious Kavat, Kalymos, and of course my daughter. I had raised her alone, but with inconsistent vigor. In those eyes, her mother's, I did see a terrible reflection of a man that did not exist. A brave and principled man about to make history. In truth, he was a Void himself, an outcast, a joke, and nothing. Driven by my humiliation, failure had made me bitter and reckless. I would dive into the depths myself to prove them all wrong.
Where it appears many of his would-be investors had lost faith in his work, does this in fact prove that he was the first to develop Void energy? And if so, does this mean all Void technology, such as things like continuity, followed his interaction with the Man on the Wall? And doesn't that reframe his first passage within the Necrolisk?
It began with us, the continuity and its twin, Wanderlust. The need for unseen shores deep in our marrow. No judge, jester, queen, or king can escape this old blood. We are nomads, eternal. And when no ocean, mountain, or sky could contain us, our gaze hungered starward. Afar, they mocked us with their brittle light, winking and jeering like dangling Iotans, forever out of reach, illuminating the truth. Immortal as we are, we die with the sun. That's where I come in.
Hopefully the next quest will provide a bit of clarity, but given what we see here, we have confirmation that the Tenno and Entrati have some special connection to the Indifference, or are potentially the only ones who can yet resist it. And further, that Entrati knew of the operator's arrival years before it actually happened, something Eternalism would in fact account for, but might not necessarily be the reason. The final aspect of this entry gives us one more valuable piece of information to consider. While it's been quite obvious the Entrati family are oblivious to most everything at this point, this confirms that Lloyd is not the one writing these texts. And unless the human version of Lloyd shown in the trailer is lying, as he doesn't seem to recognize the operator or his purpose, he would be unable to record this information anyway, given his own cryosleep. Now, does this suggest someone like Otak also has a human counterpart we have yet to meet? Or maybe that these aren't cryopods and are rather something like a transference pod? The need for the Kalymos Sequence, which we will be activating very soon, it would appear, seems to be the overall key to the true struggle within the Warframe universe. And I wonder if, after the quest is over, if more files in this area will immediately appear, or if this is where we'll have to find collectibles and such in order to uncover. Moving on to the next submission I feel has relevance, the Queens. The Tenno has encountered the Grineer Queens, the semi-mythical leaders of the Grineer. The Elder Queen, aged and diseased, had planned to transfer her mind into the Tenno's young body. This process, continuity, was common among the Orokin elites and was used to extend their lifespans indefinitely. Tesh and Dax helped the Tenno to resist the Elder Queen, who has now been eliminated. Only the younger Worm Queen remains. The Tenno has recovered much of their lost training. Suitability to fulfill the role of chosen operator has exponentially increased. Continuing to monitor. Whereas the title is referring to the twin Grineer Queens specifically, this information is essentially a very brief overview of the events that actually played out during the War with Inquest, minus the Tenno's internal struggle. But it is the end I feel has some relevance and will most likely be expounded upon during the Whispers in the Wall quest. It highlights our Tenno's suitability as the chosen operator, apparently appearing almost prophesized, if you will, preferred above all others based on some criteria we have yet to understand. Does this mean Entrati had some hand in the Man in the Wall's initial choice of our Tenno?
Time's up, kiddo. I can save them. All of them. But you have to want it.
How did he know? Is the resurgence of their training and abilities the reason their suitability went up substantially from here? Or is it because this is where we encounter our doppelganger for the first time, confirming our Tenno as the one who made the deal? And are the Tenno's powers dependent upon the Man in the Wall's level of freedom? Do we risk losing our gifts should he be vanquished? Or further, does the entire system's ability to exist, given its dependence on void energy, also risk annihilation in the process? There are those that would have this door closed forever, potentially even including Entrati himself.
I swept my fist across the floor, snatching broken shards, and in gripping tightly, I filled my hands with ink. Close it, I wrote.
And it would appear the Tenno's abilities have grown in parallel to the Indifference's influence within the Origin system. So, will we end up learning that the Tenno are conduits? And what happens if we do win? Maybe the more important question to ask is, if you could trade, would you? Surely. But all miracles require sacrifice. For their life, yours. Looking at the Sentinel passage, the Tenno has been made aware of Rel, a fellow Tenno who was outcast by his peers. Rel had voluntarily assumed the duty of keeping the Origin system safe from a void-based entity referred to as the Man in the Wall. With Rel's death, that responsibility has now transferred to the Tenno. Critical development. The Man in the Wall is identical with the entity known to us as the Indifference. Albrecht Entrati is ultimately responsible for attracting its attention to the Origin system. Albrecht Entrati may be ultimately responsible for its existence. Parameter confirmed. The Tenno is the chosen operator. We await the correct moment to activate the Kalymos Sequence. Continuing to monitor. Who is us exactly? Now, the first section of the Sentinel is obviously the events experienced during the Chains of Harrow, but the important information resides in the critical development section, where we have confirmation the Indifference is the Man in the Wall, as well as Entrati most likely being the reason it exists and is now within this system, with the responsibility of holding back the Man in the Wall being the last needed parameter to make the playable Tenno the one leading us to the necessity of the Kalymos Sequence to be initiated. First, it's important to ask, who is us? Something we'll most likely learn in the next quest, but I also want to include the Ballas and Drifter passages, not for what they say, but more for what they don't say. Executor Ballas is now known to have colluded with Hunhal during the Old War in an attempt to betray the Tenno to the Sentients. Executor Ballas is now known to have survived the collapse of the Orokin Empire. Significant sentient forces are now known to have amassed, undetected at the periphery of the Origin system during the span of time since the Old War. Executor Ballas has now manipulated the Lotus for his own ends, compelling her to resume her sentient identity, Nata, in order to use her as a proxy commander of the sentient forces. Significant development. Ballas has led the sentients in a renewed attack upon the Origin system. Era, the brother of Nata, is acting as joint commander. The factions of the Origin system have formed an alliance against this common foe. Significant development. The Tenno's personal timeline has been disrupted. Knowing he cannot kill the Tenno, Ballas has opted to imprison them within their own history. The Tenno will be unable to escape this loop without the paradoxical intervention of an outside force. Continuing to monitor. This is obviously about the new war, right up until the point where both we and the Lotus are sucked into the void, leading to a point where Ballas takes control of the Origin system for an unknown period of time, specifically indicating that the Tenno can't resurface without the paradoxical intervention of an outside force. Now, given that the same hand helps both our operator and the Drifter escape our own imprisonment, it only strengthens the need for clarification on who exactly this hand belongs to, and further, who controls it. The next passage describes the rest of the new war under the title, The Drifter. The Zariman vessel, adrift for an unknown time within the void, now acts as a containment field for unrealized possibilities. One such possibility is an alternate version of the Tenno. This individual escaped into the void on their own initiative, rather than being rescued and taken to the Origin system as the Tenno were. Within the void, they established a realm, Duviri, in which to live. The individual Drifter has now entered the Origin system. Significant development. Ballas has established himself as the ruler of the Origin system. Through his Narmer cult, all citizens have been forced to wear headpieces that distort perceived reality. Ballas is thus able to dictate exactly what the wearer experiences. Eric continues to act as Ballas' enforcer, using composite creatures called Archons as muscle. Significant development. With the assistance of Hun Hao and the Stalker, the Drifter has fought back against Ballas, destroying the Archons. The Tenno has been freed from their recursive timeline and now coexists with the Drifter. Significant development. Ballas is dead. The Lotus, now free from Ballas' conditioning, has chosen a preferred primary name and form. Continuing to monitor. Here, we are given the how of the Drifter's involvement, as well as the events at the end of the New War quest, but even though he's brought up in earlier passages, within these two, there is no mention of the Man on the Wall. In fact, he isn't mentioned until the final entry, titled The Kalymos Sequence. Critical development. In a deranged attempt to transport himself and his cult to Tau, Ballas opened portals between the void and conventional reality on an unprecedented scale. This has attracted the attention of the Indifferents, whose freedom of action appears to have drastically increased. The threat posed by the Indifferents is now at a critical level. The laboratories have come under fresh assault from the Murmur. Unless a sleeper is awoken, Albrecht Entrati's legacy will perish. Conclusion. Contacting the Necroloid. Activating the Kalymos Sequence. Awaiting the chosen operator. Now, given how integral he is during that entire saga, it's interesting that this is the only mention of the Man on the Wall. Curiously enough, now shown in all capital letters versus its inclusion in earlier passages being in lowercase. It's important to mention, too, some of this information is also inaccurate, as Ballas only ever intended to transport himself to Tau.
What will become of you, my people? My flock? You will join me there, of course, but by another path. The path of sacrifice. The path of oblivion. Cleansed of all doubt, for you will peer into pitch of day and find the sun is gone. Its heart-rendered, beating in my hand.
With his people becoming unwilling sacrifices necessary for his journey. As mentioned earlier, not only does it appear the Tenno are in a way prophesized to return, it does seem as if Albrecht Entrati, at least by whoever's cataloging all of this information, does believe them to be two separate entities. And the intro to the video reinforces that idea. As Entrati states, he lost both his eyesight and his voice after the encounter with the Man on the Wall, but the form we see of Entrati during the Warframe 1999 trailer appears to be able to see and without question has a voice. Now, are they completely different people, or do they reside in the same body as a type of split personality? Well, I believe that's a question many also ask about the Tenno, and while in-game aspects appear to show them to be different, I'm hoping this newest quest reveals the actual truth of the situation. After all, if Entrati's doppelganger has the ability to freely interact with the Origin system, and has had potentially the ability to control the machinations of the politics and ideals within the Orcan society without Albert Entrati having any control in the matter, doesn't that also suggest that our Tenno doppelganger could be doing the same thing? With the next major enemy potentially being, well, you against you. And although it may have been at one point, the indifference doesn't appear indifferent at all anymore, at least where it concerns quests with Ballas' involvement. The Sacrifice quest is the first where he begins to take an interest enough to speak to us. The Prelude to War has multiple aspects of this entity influencing the Tenno towards what appears to be Ballas' desires, and when looking at the tablets left in Duviri that sound like the man on the wall when answering the questions presented on them, a great many of them appear to have Orcan sensibilities at heart. Why? Well, I'm hoping we're going to find out soon, because either there's been a shift in the overall mindset of whatever this entity is, or we are being lied to and someone else is pulling the strings at least a portion of the time. Given the cosmic scale being insinuated within the trailers for this next quest, is it possible we'll finally see something to do with the emperors of the Orcan Empire supposedly destroyed? Even that information appears speculatory in-game. Should they still exist in some way, this would seem like the perfect time to find them. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see, huh? With all that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this look into some of the recently added lore to the game, and it got you all thinking about, well, what it is, and what does Entrati have to do with it? Maybe soon we won't have to speculate anymore. At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye.